everyone. It's good to, I think it's been a long time since we've gotten a chance to be together in a room like this, just meet a few new faces and get to know new people. I think I miss networking quite a lot, so really nice to see you guys taking out time to be here. And we've got a really good lineup of speakers in store for you, and they've prepared really interesting case studies or experiences or even thought leadership to share. So my name is Charmaine Tan. I'm the CGO at Privasec, Chief Growth Officer, and I'm really excited to introduce this evening's program to you. This event is powered by Lloyd's Register, Privasec and Marsh, and you'll hear more about the different organizations and what we do via our speakers later. So our industry experts will be walking through key benefits of building your security model, including common market misconceptions, the journey and expectations of certifications. There will be opportunities to network later as well. And before we kick off, Basil Jennings, the head of cyber consulting from Marsh, who is one of our joint hosts, would like to share a few highlights of their new capabilities. And then after that, we will kick off with the rest of the program where you hear from the different speakers. So over to you, Basil.
Thank you, Charmaine. Great to see everybody here, and welcome. So Marsh has now started with a new capability in their advisory services. So Marsh is now offering cybersecurity consulting capability, which we never had in the Pacific region before. We link in with our international colleagues, so it is an international service offering that Marsh has. We will be working quite closely with Privasec on certain services as well to bring a lot of value add in this space. And we look forward to working with all of you here and to discuss further and deep dive into what our consulting services look like. How do we help uplift your cyber capability, your maturity, and also work through a new service that we're bringing down, which is the cyber quantification. Now, previously, a lot of organisations would be able to come and tell you what your cyber posture looks like, right? Where your risks were at a high level, where you needed improvements, etc. But now what we're able to do is we're able to quantify that and deep dive into your tool sets. So we're able to have a look at your endpoints and tell you how effective it is and what type of vulnerabilities you have. And then also we're able to quantify that to be able to tell you that, as an example, you could be susceptible to a $50 million ransomware attack, right, based on what your posture looks like. And then we can also help put strategies and roadmaps together to help you achieve the desired outcomes that you're after based on your risk appetite and the crown jewels that you're trying to protect. Thank you, Charmaine.
Thanks, Basil. All right, for our first segment, we have Sita Garth, our GRC and security consultant from Privasec. She has a very strong understanding and background in governance and technology, especially in contributing to the overall cybersecurity maturity of the business. So I'll hand the stage over to you as she demystifies ISMS and our security model for us. Thanks, Sita.
So hi everyone, welcome again. So my name's Sita. I'm a senior GRC consultant at Privasec, and I'm going to be walking you through demystifying your ISMS and debunking some of the most common misconceptions. So Privasec is a leading cybersecurity partner housing skills that contributes to a range of services from red team attack simulations, ethical penetration testing to security governance, risk and compliance. And we actually have offices in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Singapore, Malaysia, and just a small presence in Auckland as well. So as mentioned, so we have two lines of business. We've got the red team, which provides technical and drone hacking, and then we've also got the GRC team, which specialises in the governance strategies, risk assessments, risk management, which is kind of why we're here today. And then just up here as well, we're certified to ISO obviously as well, and we've got numerous certifications. And then this here is just a bunch of different clients that we sort of currently work with. Okay, so let's get into it. So Privasec has conducted end-to-end ISMS implementation for a really long period of time. So that's why I thought it'd be best place today to kind of debunk some of these. Okay, so the first misconception. So ISO 27001 is titled Information Security Management System. So it's therefore more about creating a system to manage information security than it is about strong passwords and encryption. So a common analogy that we like to use is that being ISO 27001 certified does not mean that you have a good car, it means that you have a good mechanic, and I'll get back to that later. So being ISO 27001 certified means that you have a good system to govern your security posture, so it's a governance tool. It's up to the business to use that tool and to manage the risk and either maintain or grow its security posture depending on how much money they're willing to spend based on the risk appetite, so it's kind of striking a balance. The risk appetite is the level of risk that you're willing to take, and it usually varies depending on what you're trying to protect. So here's the example I was referring to earlier. If you have a family and you drive your kids in the car and your mechanic calls saying that your tyres are wearing thin, you would get new tyres straight away because the risk is really high that you face. But I don't have kids yet, so I'd probably accept the risk and I'd drive my car until the tyres are beyond thin or bald, and I'd probably drive it until it's no longer legal. So at this point, the risk would be too high and then I would spend the money. So again, being certified doesn't mean that you're secure, it only means that you have a working system to manage the security risk and the posture. So ISMS is just a set of policy, a bunch of heavy documents that you put on your shelf and dust off once a year when the auditor's coming. So this stems from an old interpretation and implementation of the standard that we used to see in the 2000s. Sure, it's best practice to have a set of short, easily consumable policies, but ISO 27001 is actually not about writing more policies, it's actually about being more effective with those policies. So the standard says only what is necessary for the effectiveness of information security management system. So it's actually not about creating more documents or paperwork. So when we develop ISMS systems for clients seeking certification to ISO 27001, we actually only create 5 documents, of which 2 are not required but are, in our opinion, best practice to help you manage your certification. And we also use tools like Confluence and SharePoint to actually collaborate and edit and work best with clients. So as you can see, like the days of the tick box policies are long gone. Most auditors, and I say that because we do see a lot, are good auditors looking for intent and evidence of effective security governance. Okay, so number 3. Usually people who want to say that ISMS is pointless are those that think that ISO 27001 is there to bury them under processes, or those that expect ISO to make their passwords stronger. But ISO 27001 is a governance framework. It's not about making stronger passwords or firewalls. As the years pass, we actually hear less and less of this because people perceive security as a business issue and that there's a need for the business to control and manage security holistically. So to put it bluntly, ISO is what brings your security investments together. It's what kind of links IT security and the business. So ISO is the tool. It's then up to the executives to invest time in order to actually evolve and secure the business. Now with number 4, we did kind of just touch on this lightly in misconception number 2. So ISO 27001 is called an information security management system. So as the title suggests, it's a management system and it's about helping you build a risk-based governance system. Now it is true that ISO 27001 does contain Annex A, about 144 controls. These are things like strong password, access cards, encryption, etc. However, these are in Annex only, and ISO 27001, the actual standard, does not tell you which control you should or should not implement. And when people think of ISO 27001, they think of using stronger passwords, writing down processes, or like upgrading their firewalls. But these are controls which companies can use to mitigate their risk. So as I mentioned, and just to summarize, ISO 27001 does not prescribe controls. It includes in Annex A a list of common best practice controls which you should consider, but ultimately it is up to you to choose which controls you do use or don't use. So let's just look at the halfway misconception number 5. So in the industry, security folk treat their standard like a football team, so they like pledge alliance to one or the other. So some might say they're ISO certified, others say they're compliant with NIST, or that SOC 2 provides the best perspective or approach. But again, ISO 27001 is a governance framework used to manage risk. So NIST and other control-based standards are a list of best proactive controls. So nothing stops you from using these controls to mitigate your risk. And actually at Privasec, we help clients implement ISMS systems to manage using and managing sort of NIST, SOC 2 and PCI controls every other day, along with so many other standards as well. So it wouldn't make sense if you maintain different systems in isolation. You need a management system and a set of working controls that work for your business in order for security to be put into place. Okay, so on to the next misconception. ISO is not there to tell you what level of security you should have. It's actually there to help you identify security risks, and then you decide how you want to mitigate them based on the security you as a business want to achieve. So arguably you can very much get certified with below average security controls as long as the business are aware of the resulting risks and obviously accepting them. That is because fixing them is higher than, the cost of fixing them is actually higher than the risk itself. So ISO 27001 is very flexible, it's non-prescriptive. It was actually made that way to be adaptable to all businesses, small and large, and across all industries. The downside of actually having so much flexibility, the flexibility that I just discussed, is that it does give you plenty of opportunities to shoot yourself in the foot. Because at the end of the day, it is expected that your actions are in line with your business decisions. So as long as you drive your entire cybersecurity entity towards a business objective, you will maintain a functional level of security. So number 7. So a lot of people say that ISMS is a really long journey. So some people think it takes 1, 2, sometimes 3 years to achieve certification. And I think having this mindset can actually be one of the biggest roadblocks of even just getting your foot in the door of ISO certification. An ISMS typically takes between 5 to 9 months to implement from the moment we engage a client to the moment the certification lands on their desk. It might take a little longer if you do it internally or with a contractor. So approximately 5 to 9 months. And the impact on your staff is usually about 40 to 80 hours all up. And that's the combined time commitment we would ask from your stakeholders to get a working information security management system. So that said, certification is not the crowning of your security maturity journey. It's actually not something you seek once you have all your security problems and dealt with all of your risks. It's something you do closer to the beginning of your journey, right now, to actually help you fix your cyber functions. So remember, ISO 27001 gives you the tools. You don't go and buy your tools once the job's finished. So in 5 to 9 months from now, you could be certified, and sometimes even faster if all your ducks are lined up. So believe it or not, some people actually go all the way and they build an ISMS system and they actually never certify it. And that's mostly because people are scared of the audit, or they think that saving company money by not certifying it is the best way to go about it. But we're in an environment where security to the average person is vague. It's hard to understand, so people fall back on certifications. They fall back on, ISO 27001 certifications or SOC 2 attestations to recognize the level of security as a benchmark. Certificates make people happy, they build trust, and we actually see an increase in revenue as well. The benefits a certificate brings far outweighs the cost of certification, which is actually quite reasonable. In many markets or high-value tenders, you simply cannot play if you are not certified, because they're looking for that representation of security, and if they don't see it, again, it's hard to get your foot through the door. Now, auditors are looking for compliances rather than non-compliances, and their job is to help you maintain an effective governance system and not try and make you fail. So this is the 9th misconception. It's a number of times people tell us they can't get the money to even replace their firewall, so they're not going to be able to afford an ISMS system anytime soon. And this statement can come from the business as a whole or the IT department that's in charge of ensuring that security is maintained. But in a way, there's some misunderstanding here. If you lack the funding, the first thing you should spend money on is getting ISMS. Getting a working ISMS and then getting certification. So as I said earlier, certificates make people happy. So if you think of ISO 27001 certificates as a business commodity, even if you're in IT and you have no money or no budget, you can approach it from the perspective of this certificate presents a benchmark or a reference of how we maintain our security standards or how we manage security, so we can increase our sales with this shiny certificate and put it on the front door. certified, your certificates will guarantee regular funding to mitigate your risk even if you are doing everything right. So in short, think of ISO 27001 certification as a way to crystallize management commitment and guarantee funding in the long term. Because if you're able to identify risks and then justify it, then it just makes sense. Now, these days information security is owned by the business, not just IT. Therefore, it's usually the business that pays for ISO 27001, not IT. It used to be IT, but I can tell you that the majority of ISMS we do these days don't actually come out of the IT budget. So outsourcing and building your ISMS can start from around 60K. So this is like the starting price of a fully outsourced ISMS system with training and knowledge to ensure the internal capability is distributed so you can manage it on your own. And obviously Privasec's more than happy to help with this. Now, some people do it internally to keep the cost down, and this also works. And Privasec and other consulting firms are happy to do this, but it usually takes more time because you find that it's actually more expensive and does require a full-time equivalent rather than just outsourcing your work to a consulting firm like Privasec. So to sum this one up, do not mistake the cost of implementing your security controls with the cost of an certified ISMS. Okay, now the last one we have here is that certification bodies must remain independent and for that reason will not help you design and implement an ISMS. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on the perspective of consulting firms like us, we have consultants who specialise in ISMS, which are or have been registered lead auditors and lead auditors, with a real wealth of experience seeing as we start ISMS projects every month in almost all industries and all companies. So to sum it up, if you want a working ISMS security model, you need a working set of security controls as well as a management system behind it for governing control. So you actually really need to build, certify, and then improve that. So what are the next steps from this? So today we learned about ISO 27001. It's about governance. No matter how good or bad your security posture is, you can actually achieve certification. In fact, the whole point of ISO 27001 is to help you improve your security posture. We spoke about the timeframes, the cost of certification. So now that you've got all that info, if you need to certify, your next step is to build an ISMS, to certify it, to start improving your security posture. And of course, we're here to help. So I turned the 10 misconceptions into 10 truths. So you can actually just take a picture of that and sort of just reflect on that if you would like as well. And that was it. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Sita. Really love that breakdown of the 10 misconceptions, and I found it really helpful as well. Alright, on to our next session. So this one needs no introduction. We have the certification body themselves. So we have LRQA representative Brendan Jackson, and he's the National Business Development Manager. He gets involved with all the different clients. He's here to actually talk us through about managing risk and building trust. And I can't wait to hear what he has to share with us. So over to you, Brendan.
I'll try not to stand too close to that.
Yeah, I think it works.
Alright everyone, thank you for coming along today, and as Shemaine has mentioned, I'll be talking to you today around managing risk and building trust through independent assurance. A little bit of background about myself. I've been working in certification for the last 6 years. I've worked with clients small, large, medium, across different levels of information security, certification, and also independent audits as well. Before we delve into today's topic at hand, I'll talk a little bit around who Lloyd's Register is, where we've come from and where we are now. So we actually began as a marine classification society in 1760. And the next 261 years now, we have developed ourselves into being a leading professional services body across over 195 offices worldwide. There are some pretty impressive stats up on the screen right now, but the one that stands out to me the most is the fact that Lloyd's Register is owned by an independent charity called the Lloyd's Register Foundation. Now, all the money that Lloyd's Register has a surplus of at the end of the year, this goes towards the foundation, and all this money is channeled into public research, funding of grants, raising public awareness and trying to improve technologies within the business community to make the business community a healthier and safer place. What I'm going to do today is give you a little bit of context as to why information security has risen to prominence in the last 10-15 years, then talk about some of the changing aspects that have really brought this into focus in the last 2 years especially, and then where Lloyd's register can help and also what the certification process can bring. So if you look on the screen here, you'll notice the first thing that comes up is natural disasters and unforeseen events. With all of our businesses, we rely more and more on the storage and usage of data. And if your information is stored in one location and it's, let's say a fire comes through, we've seen fires in Sydney, we've seen fires in California, even recently in WA. If you lose your data center and that's the only place that you've got your information stored, that represents a huge risk to your business. So a framework needs to be developed to understand how we mitigate the risk and how we spread the information around, so that if something does happen like this, then we have a way of protecting ourselves. Another item that you would have seen in the news over and over again in the last 10 years is data breaches and incidents of hacking or information being leaked. Just last year, the government was hacked and my accounts were actually put up for sale on the dark web. Now, as you know, people can use your information in all sorts of ways, and this is one classic example of how a small data breach, I think it was one person who left their terminal open, led to, I think it was around 3,000 accounts being sold on the dark web. Ransomware and malware, which we've kind of touched on a little bit already today. For those of you who aren't aware what ransomware and malware is, it's software designed to either get inside your system and hold you to ransom, whether you be a business or a person, or it may just be a malicious intent to try and destroy and remove data wherever possible. This happened to Lion last year, unfortunately. They were held to ransom to the tune of $1 million after their system got breached, and it was resolved in the end, but this is the sort of level of risk that it can present to your business or even to your own person. One that I was not aware of until today's presentation was the cost of corporate or industrial espionage. So this study that's on the screen right now was done in 2018, and it estimated that around $5 billion per annum is lost in the Australian market to corporate or industrial espionage. That's based on only the reported incidents that have occurred. So if we think about that's only the reported incidents, and that's based on 3 years ago, we're now using a lot more technology, a lot more information is being shared across the web. This figure is actually likely substantially higher now than it was 3 years ago. The next one we look at is the Internet of Things. Now, if you look around the room, I would imagine at least one person has more than just their laptop accessing the Internet. It could be your phone. My fridge accesses the Internet. I don't know why. Your TVs, your PlayStations, your Kindles, your watches, everything is now more and more interconnected with the Internet, and this represents a huge risk, and we've had to broaden the way that we think about information risk because there are now so many different devices that can tap into the Internet. How do we manage that, and how do we find a framework that is constantly evolving with these changing risks? Now, I mentioned that there's been some changes in the way that risk has changed from an information perspective. You probably are aware that there has been a pandemic in the last 2 years. And what this has meant is that we are now finding ourselves more and more working from home. I actually spoke with someone in this room not too long ago, and they mentioned that previously they used to do all of their work from the office. They thoroughly enjoyed it. But nowadays, the mandate and the common norm is to work from a home environment, at least part of the time throughout the week. We've also gone from an environment where we had everyone accessing their content through corporate networks. That's now changing. Everyone's now at home, so they have to access their content through home networks, Starbucks networks, public Wi-Fi. There's a whole array of different access points that are now open to risk that we haven't previously thought about in a traditional business sense. We also have to think about the way that we interact with our businesses, both externally and internally. So previously, you might have gone to a meeting and you would have met up in a boardroom or in your own boardroom to have those conversations. That's no longer the case. If you think about most of your meetings nowadays, they're done via Teams, Link, Zoom, WhatsApp messages, email. Everything's digitally communicated, and it means that there's more information there that's susceptible to this level of risk. And there's also more devices that are being used to promote and push this information. So how do we manage all this and stay abreast and continuously evolve as technology evolves to make sure that we're looking after everything. LR actually did a survey not too long ago, about 6 months ago now, at the start of the pandemic in Australia, and we found that 75% of businesses have discovered that their risks are actually changing from an information security perspective, primarily because of all the factors we've just talked about. Interestingly, 44% of these businesses actually believed that working from home represented the biggest risk to their information security, and that ties in with all the pieces we just talked about around the difference in the way that we operate. So just to recap on the changes, we've got a loss of control or secure environments with the home environments or different access points. In-office functions of meetings and face-to-face has been changed with virtual. Employees are more vulnerable because there's what they don't know, and we need to try and work out ways to proactively manage their process so that they are aware of what the risks are and how we mitigate that. The other points we've already touched on, so I won't go into them too much, but that's a high level as to why the changes have brought about a much more focused appreciation of an information security framework. So what is 27001? It is effectively a structured framework in which we manage people, process and technology. And one of the ones that I think is most important to highlight, and where a lot of companies look at this in a probably too traditional and simplistic way, is that people is a huge part of that. If your people don't know and understand how they're putting themselves or the business at risk, they are going to be the weakest link potentially in your business and your information system. The main reasons for implementing, Sid has kindly touched upon already, but on the screen here you can see a lot of them. Having a proactive framework in place really means that we're working to a best practice, and the 27001 standard is recognised now as one of the best international frameworks for governance in this area. It builds knowledge, so as part of the framework you need to look at how your people are understanding risk and how they manage their own risk, what processes are in place, how you're evolving your technologies to make sure that it's adapting as threats adapt. And this all starts to build knowledge and trust and transparency across the business. And the more that we have people working to a framework of excellence, it improves the structure and process. And there's a big part of the 27001 framework is monitoring, evaluating, analysing, moving forwards with how you manage risk. It also gives you an avenue to have a look at what your risks are from a regulatory perspective. And all of these things build transparency and trust both from an internal and an external perspective. That's why we're starting to see tenders with federal, state, federal, state governments all asking for 27001 or equivalent compliance. Because frankly, if you're doing business with someone that's not managing their information security risks, you're putting yourself at risk as well. Some of the things that you'll see on the screen here are what I've seen in the last 6 years in the certification world as the keys to success and having a good foundation for setting up an information security system. Identifying who's going to be responsible for driving the system, whether it's internal, whether it's external through consultants. Make sure that you identify who's going to be driving that process and have everyone that they work with driving in the same direction. These people should be responsible for writing out the scope of your system. And what that means is what, who, and where, and why are we covering these aspects of the business, and what are we going to detail as part of this plan. Again, I would strongly recommend speaking with any external experts you can find or internal experts. Information security isn't just about the expertise outside of your business. A framework that works is one that fits in with the culture and the ideals of the business, and you want to make sure that all of your staff are involved, happy, and are really a part of the process, because the more they're involved, the more likely it is the system will be driving towards the right goals and they'll be working to make it work as well. Another thing that I find with a lot of companies looking at certification or having a system put in place is they set off on this ideal, but they don't really give themselves any key timelines or timeframes to work with. Working backwards can actually be a great way of looking at the process. If you said, for example, I want to have certification by December, you then think back and think, okay, well that means we need to have a system in place by December to give us 1 or 2 months to test the system and make sure it's ready for that level of independent assurance. then means if we take a further step back, we have to have the system written and understood by all the people within the team 1 or 2 months at least before that for the system to be implemented correctly. We then go back and then think, well, who's going to write this policy and procedures and look at the technologies, and how do we build that culture and understanding into the system? And then you've got 3 or 4 identifiable roadmap points in the system, in your own process, so you can start to nut out the different details there. One thing that's key, and one thing that I have found some companies have perhaps lacked in the past when going for independent verification, is you need to have evidence that your system is working, and you need to have evidence that you've reviewed it. If you go into the audit without any evidence that you've actually done a review of the system working, there's no way that we can actually say, yes, your system is working to the ideals, because we have no measuring stick. So, where can Lloyd's Register help you with this process? One of the big things that I've found in the last 2 years is you really need to foster a culture of champions within your own business. The more people understand the system, the more it helps anyone coming in externally, anyone working internally, to actually develop the system and find a mesh that fits both from a compliance perspective and a framework perspective, but also aligns with their own goals and makes them invested in the process. It's also a great way of developing your own staff and making them feel a sense of worth within the system. You can have your staff recognised to diploma levels in internal auditing, in information governance, or any other standard really, but it's a great way of making sure that they're growing and developing, and therefore it's not just a cost on the business, it's a cost and investment in the people and processes within the business as well. One of my favourite things to talk about is gap analysis, and it's a great way of getting a snapshot as to where your business is. It doesn't have to be across the whole business, it doesn't have to be an exercise in pinning you against where you're wrong or where you're weak. You can use it across any part of the business, and you can define the scope as to what we go and look at. It's a great way of getting independent snapshots as to where you are and what you're doing, and can help you estimate the timeframes as to where you're going to be in 2, 3, 6, 12 months' time. There's also a self-assessment tool that I'll briefly show you after this presentation, but we'll move on. The last step in the process is the independent assurance, whether it's certification or even if it's working towards a custom criteria that you've built yourself. International frameworks like ISO 27001 are fantastic, but they're not for everyone always. And if you have your own level of compliance and your own criteria, we can work with you to go and independently audit that separate to people within the business, or we can even go and help set up a framework of excellence across your supply chain or other business partners as well. It's not just limited to who you are, it's limited to, you can expand it to make sure that it covers the full breadth of all the risks that might come into your business externally as well. This is a quick example of the 27001 free self-assessment tool. It takes 5 minutes, it's 19 questions, and at the end of that, you can produce an output like this, which gives you a quick snapshot as to where does your business sit across the 5 core areas, and then runs down a brief as to how you've got the score you have, and explains some of the obligations involved in that framework. Assurance or independent verification, having someone come in to audit your business externally provides a lot of benefits, but here are the key ones. Industry insights is a big one. Auditors or consultants, they come in, they see hundreds of businesses each day, well not each day, rather each year. And when they do that, they learn what's best practice, what works, what doesn't, what works in certain cultures and industries and what doesn't as well. They can provide some of that insight during the audit process to help you tighten up areas that might be lacking in strength, but they can also really help share and help advise, if this area is weak, how would you go about fixing it, and try and help you bridge the understanding. They won't give you the answers, but you can start to understand how you might move in that right direction. As I mentioned, it's a proactive framework, and that means that you've got continual improvement built into that matrix. It's an accredited certification, so if you do want to go for the big tenders and the big opportunities, you do have to pay to play, as Sita said, and that's a part of the process. All of these different elements build into a trust, performance and credibility, whether it's internally or externally, and you can show that through a certificate, you can show that through a report. These are some other standards that are rising to prominence on the back of managing risk and information risk. So business continuity looks more broadly at how you manage your business risk, whether it's from large-scale events or small-scale events, and how you build that framework in. Risk management isn't actually a certifiable standard, but it is a standard that you can use to understand the methodology of thinking around how do I apply risk-based thinking to my business. The custom criteria I've touched on briefly already. It's effectively looking at, if you don't believe in certification, there are other avenues that you can set as benchmark or best practice, and then we can come in and help provide that independent assurance that you're operating to those all your stakeholders are as well. And the four that you see on the, or three that you see on the right and at the bottom, these are all more niche and focused information security standards. Health is an obvious one because there's a lot of confidential data in there. Privacy information management has come about largely on the back of GDPR, but is a growing standard. IT service management and security management for supply chain are also growing in terms of the requirements and requests that we're seeing from businesses as well. That's all from me today. We'll save any questions for the Q&A session at the end, but thank you for your time and hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you, Brandon. It's always good to hear from the perspective of the certification body. I don't think the mic bites me. Anyways, so next up we have Michael Weeks, Vocus Quality and Assurance Manager. He currently leads a team at Vocus and is responsible for ensuring ISO 9001 and ISO 27001 certifications are appropriately implemented and maintained. He'll be sharing with us his experience on their setup all the way through to certification. Michael, over to you.
Hi, my name's Michael Weeks. Thank you for introducing me. I'm the Quality Assurance Manager at Vocus, and I have been working at Vocus since 2018. So after the last 3 years, we've undergone significant changes in the business and also to our management systems. In the lead up to today, I was thinking long and hard about ways I could make this presentation interesting. Because whenever I say the word compliance, audit, or ISO standards, I usually see people's eyes roll the back of their head. To this day, my mother still doesn't know what I do, but I think the best way to describe it is my role as a business improvement manager, and that's what ISO standards are about. So just to give you a little summary of Vocus, we were established back in 2008. And over several years, we acquired Amcom and NextGen. In 2016, we merged with M2, along with the brands Commander, iPrimus, and Dodo. You probably all know of Dodo, at least. We've had lots of processes, systems, people, and regulatory obligations to think about. It created a very challenging environment to maintain our certification. At the time, just before I arrived, we had 4 separate ISO certificates, which is 9,000 and 27,000, 2 certification bodies, and 4 separate audit cycles every year. So it became, as I said, quite challenging. In 2018, the federal government also introduced telecommunications sector security reforms, making telcos have to consider security as a part of just all business change. After several years of hard work, we're now the 4th largest telco in Australia. We have 30,000 kilometres of fibre, 13 data centres, and built several subsea international cables. Vocus has streamlined many of its processes, improved engagement in ISO across the business, and as last October, with the help of LRQA, we now have 1 annual audit cycle. So just like many others have already covered today, I'd like to go through a couple of the drivers for why we got certified. So as we've already discussed, it's becoming a customer requirement. To continue to grow the business, it made sense for us to certify against our core operations. The 27001 standard also enabled us to compete against larger organisations in the sector. But it wasn't just our customers that benefited from certification, it's also delivered a lot of value for our organisation. Our management supported embedding a risk-based approach to decision-making and laying the foundations for continual improvement mindset. Adopting this ethos at Vocus supported achieving our organisational business objectives and attracting new customers by building trust in the market. You know, it only takes one data breach to lose your reputation forever. Just a high-level overview of some of our customers. We have customers in the federal government, state government agencies, some large oil, gas and mining, and also in the financial sector. If you've ever submitted a tender, as we've already sort of covered a couple times, ISO is becoming an expectation. If you'd like to hear more about some recent customer wins in these sectors, I recommend going to our LinkedIn page or our website. Specifically, there's a video on Vic Bank and Minjar Gold, and there's some nice videos to watch there about what we did for them. I also read recently a New South Wales government-sponsored task force called on governments across Australia to adopt internationally recognised cybersecurity standards for cloud services. One key recommendation was to prioritise proposals or tender bids which demonstrate compliance with standards like 27001. I wanted to also share some of the key achievements and improvements that I've been part of at Vocus, not just solely a security-focused change, but more improvement to the business. One of the things we did was presented to our executive on ISO earlier on in the piece when we were trying to improve the engagement in the business. After we presented at the executive level, it brought on one of the most significant changes for us. Our program now has very high visibility and engagement across the business and very high accountability for management. With third-party monitoring and management being such a key issue, we worked in partnership with the procurement department, and over the past 2 years, we've dramatically improved the overall control of third-party risks. To today, we have established a new vendor management framework. We have embedded a security addendum into our contracts for all our third parties, and we've also implemented a new supplier security questionnaire, and just recently we moved to a cloud-based tool, so it makes it even easier. So basically, after we implemented some of those initiatives, it's dramatically reduced the administrative efforts, our exposure to security risk, and the procurement team also established some of the best practices to get the most value out of its vendors. One last thing of note that we got involved with was with the facilities team. We helped develop a physical security register by assessing all the physical security controls across our sites. And now the team have a comprehensive view of risk, physical security risk at our sites, and they're able to drive a risk-based approach to their budgets. So not only have we identified if there are issues, but they can justify upgrades and improvements based off that. So that's been a win for us too. And I just wanted to end with a couple of lessons learned. You know, we've all shared our own experiences to date. And just from my perspective, I wanted to share a couple of key things I think everybody should consider when we're going on a certification journey. The first one is getting top management involved from day one. I can't stress enough that getting the real top leadership, the executive, involved in your certification makes a big difference. When you get to the people in the business that have true authority, they're going to lead by example. And if it's not a priority for your other manager, for the executive, it won't be a priority for anybody else. The next thing is to keep it simple. Don't bite off more than you can chew. I have a colleague now that's getting certified for 45001, which is the safety standard, and he's literally starting with the head office and one other office. That's it. So keeping it small, not going too big. The next one is about cultural fit. When you're implementing something like the ISO management system, you have to think about what will work for your company's culture. If you just do a plug and play, take somebody else's policies or something that works elsewhere, that might not work for you. And you can't have a situation you have one compliance guru running around managing all the processes and all the systems. It's just not going to work. The standards are pushing and encouraging, promoting that these processes are embedded in just day-to-day functions anyway. The next one's become a salesperson. From my experience, selling the value of the ISO requirements answers the question of what's in it for me. If you're going around the business working with the different stakeholders, just saying because the standard says so and it's a compliance requirement, is it really going to cut it to win people over and influence them? I've done a lot of work in this space and I've built a lot of great relationships, and some of the wins I've just explained are because of off the back of building those relationships. And lastly, I just want to say it's a commitment. I see from my own personal experience at other organisations that people started off as a project and then they get to year 2 and they're like, oh, what, we have to do it again. So it's something that you're committing to. It's going to be with the business as long as you're in business. So just think of it in a sustainable way and think of growing over time. And that's it from me. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thought that was very practical and really nice of you to walk through the learnings and experience, and totally agree with what you said about getting buy-in from the senior management and the leadership, and also about focusing on what's manageable first and then working away from there. But that's really good. Thank you very much for that. And last but not least, we have Ben Crowder here to share with the rest of us. He's the head of strategic risk from Marsh, and Ben's responsible for leading the strategic risk practice across enterprise risk management, business continuity management, emergency management and work, health and safety, and so many others. And he'll be talking through emerging issues in cyber risk. So, with that, to you.
Thank you, and thank you everyone that's come here today and also listening in. Just a bit of background. My role with Marsh, and for those of you that don't know, Marsh is one of the world's largest insurance and risk advisory firms. And I guess we look at risk very much through the insurance lens, so to speak. So we sort of tend to sort of have a look at when things go wrong, and so when we talk cyber risk, we're talking about when cyber risks happen. I do a lot of work with organisations trying to link cyber risks and IT risks to enterprise risks, and quite often we try to play translator and try to sort of translate some of those risks into enterprise risks. I myself am not an IT or cyber security expert, but my colleague Faisal here is, and we work quite closely with having intelligent conversations with cyber and IT people, but also with risk people about what cyber risk really is. Today, I thought I'd just talk through a few things that we're seeing. So some of the things that we're seeing through some of the research that we're getting, some of the discussions that we're seeing with clients, and some real life cases, and some of the things that we're seeing with some of the work that we're doing with our clients. Those things are going to be generally how cyber risk is currently sitting within the global risk landscape. The whole notion of silent cyber and some of the issues that are existing and cropping up from an insurance coverage point of view, and there's risks associated with having adequate cover with cyber insurance. The whole emergence of OT cyber risk and the increase in OT, and we've touched on that. And then finally, just talking about the role of big data and what big data is playing when it comes to analysing cyber risk. So, and a little bit of a plug for us at the end there too. So, Each year, Marsh, in partnership with the World Economic Forum, comes up with a global risks report. Essentially, it's a survey of a whole number of people from across the globe in various roles, different sizes, and basically just tries to measure the pulse in terms of what's keeping them up at night, what are some of those risks. So, as you can see, some of the interesting takeouts at the moment is in purple you can see sort of cyber or technological risks, and really in recent times they've really dominated some of the global risks, and they've been some of the largest risks for organisations, boards, CEOs that have had to grapple with. Obviously in 2020 we had a sort of lot of climate change that we saw, so bushfires and things like that got, and obviously towards the end of last year and then this year a pandemic, but still very much it's still the top of the agenda for a lot of organisations. The next slide here is, we're looking at sentiments and I guess the risk concerns over different time horizons. And I guess uniquely what we see here is that cyber or technological style risks are present right across uniquely present across these three time horizons. So they're concerns for organisations in the short term, in the medium term, and also in the long term. So with that, I guess what some of the other concerns that we're starting to see within cyber is the whole the risks associated with cyber insurance in itself. So generally, a lot of organisations have traditionally thought that insurance policies would pick up losses associated with any sort of cyber attack. So, and you can think that if you suffer a cyber attack, you've got an insurance policy there willing to pick it up. The problem that sits there is that a lot of coverages has not been explicitly clarified in insurance coverages, and hence the term silent cyber. But more and more, as we're seeing, is that more and more organisations are relying on technology and computers in order to do their business. So when we talk about cyber risks, in our space we talk a lot about the consequences of what happens when we have cyber risks. The process that we go through from a consulting standpoint with our clients is we go through a relatively systematic process of firstly understand, well, what's the nature of the event? Is it an internal event? So is it someone from within the organisation that might be causing this, or is it someone from outside of the organisation? And often too, what are their motives? Do they have? Is it accidental? Is it some sort of accidental event that's happening here? Is there criminal motives here, or are we looking at other things such as hacktivism, or certainly international security sort of type of arrangements where there's government agencies are trying to come in and create some interruptions. The other process that we do a lot around is helping clients actually define, what are their critical systems? So, what systems to them are the real critical systems that they're relying on, and what's the data? What various data do they have? What sort of details do they actually have on that data? So, does it extend beyond just names and phone numbers? Does it extend, for example, to credit card numbers and things like that? And I guess the more information that's stored, ultimately, the more value some of that information has. Obviously, when we go through and look at the impacts, we're generally looking at whether there's compromises associated with the integrity, confidentiality, and availability of that information, and so it's a relatively straightforward process. But I guess when we actually start to see the consequences that we're coming out, this is where things can sort of we see all different types of financial losses and economic losses. So generally, from what we would consider a first-party point of view, is that we're seeing organisations that are suffering a direct impact to their revenue. So they've got an outage that's sufficient for them to actually have an impact to their revenue. But other costs, of course, there are additional costs that organisations would have, obviously around all sorts of additional costs associated with investigations and getting people in to try and limit the damage and additional marketing and all those sorts of things. So there's a whole host of additional costs that clients, that organisations that are out there, if they suffer a cyber attack, would not have usually had. And again, it's important to try and pick up some of those things in cover. At the same time too, that there's potential third-party claims, so the organisation could actually be held liable for costs associated with loss of data. The level of information now that cyber insurers are actually requiring goes to what these guys were talking about earlier. So a lot of the information around your IT security or ISO frameworks or your NIST frameworks, that's similar questions now that insurers are actually asking prior to writing insurance. So there's more and more of those requirements for that information before an insurer is going to want to insure you.
We don't want to ask too many questions because we know our competitors don't. So if we make it too hard for them to purchase a policy from us, they'll go to the guy next door. So
yeah, look, it's probably different. There's I think you probably need to factor in the insurance market as well, because insurance markets, like anything, sort of go through sort of bull and bearish conditions, and right now we're in probably one of the hardest insurance markets going around. So it's not necessarily, insurers are not necessarily clamouring to try and find business. They're being very particular about what risks that they want, and they're quite happy to walk away from a risk that they're not comfortable with.
Is it because of the financial big impacts of those like massive attacks?
It's not. Look, there's probably a lot of reasons why, and I guess we could talk at length about the sort of insurance market cycles, so to speak. But yeah, there's probably a lot of reasons why. But generally speaking, what we're seeing and what we're hearing is that organisations are needing to disclose what they're doing, demonstrate what they've got in place in order to provide some levels of satisfaction to insurers.
Cool. Are there any other questions from the floor? Yes?
You mentioned at the beginning, when your colleague, you mentioned about risk quantification, cyber risk quantification. Is there any standard framework that, or is this something proprietary you developed?
Yeah, so quantification in terms of when we're looking at, when we do quantification, usually we're trying to calculate economic loss. So we're trying to understand with the client, if something happened, what the economic loss would be. Now that typically falls into the revenue, or what sort of revenue impact that you might have, and what sort of additional costs. Now, the modelling that we can do can sit at, I guess, different sorts of levels. At a relatively high level, we would look at things, how we look at potentially what sort of outage period that you might have based on an event, and look at your revenue. But then, for far more advanced methods, we look at different types of outage periods. We might look at different scenarios, and then we run more stochastic style modelling, Monte Carlo simulations, those sorts of things. So I think it's safe to say that when we're trying to measure and determine the consequences of a cyber event, we're not trying to create one certain line in the sand and say that's what your potential loss is. What we're trying to say is that, look, that you could have a range of probabilities. You might have a 1 in 100 year event, or you might have a 1 in 1,000 year event, and this is how those things would happen. And so what we try to do is to look at a range, and then using some analytics to try and calculate some probability-based assessments of that. So that's around the first party side of things. We also do a lot around benchmarking. So we've got lots of claims data, obviously. So we're seeing lots and lots of claims that are happening globally. And so what we're able to do is actually look at a particular industry, look at their organisational size, and then compare that really to organisations around the world, and then be able to sort of make some judgment calls there as well.
I have a question on the Vocus case story. I apologize because I can't see it firstly there.
Mike.
So, question for you, Mike. How, aside from yourself, how long do you think, in terms of perhaps man days or effort, the ISMS would have taken your team, not necessarily your direct team, but the team at Vocus collectively to achieve?
I think, I would say, I won't say man days, but I would say conservatively, I'd want to have a 12-month runway. before going for it, and that's probably involved some external help as well. I think especially, I was talking before about, it's not a project.
Yeah.
When you set it up, you probably will have a PM or assign someone to lead it, because there's a lot to do. So things like setting up a policy pack, I think you just mentioned that already, getting that in place will be a big help, because that's a lot of, there's a lot of components there that you might have to cover. But yeah, for us, or for me, from my experience, I would say conservatively, I would give it 12 months, but obviously you can do it faster, maybe if you have an excellent consultant to help. I know. So that's from my side. I think it really comes down to the complexity of your business and what your scope is as well. So it just depends what you do and what you want to have certified.
Beyond the time to certification,
Yeah.
the effort on business SMEs and IT SMEs who are not necessarily part of your team,
Yeah.
for whom the primary focus is not necessarily to get certified, but
Yes.
their own objective.
Yeah.
So quite often people say, well, how long will it take my business? How much effort would they have to dedicate to this project to become certified?
And that's probably why I give it that 12-month window, because I think if I put it like this, going back to that comment I made about management involvement, if it's a priority project, so you have prioritization, then you can get the resources involved so they're part of it to get it done. If it's a side thing that a very, very, very small group of people are driving, and IT is not interested because they want to, I don't know,
You keep begging for the
right? They're saying, I don't have enough resources. Who are you going to give me? What have I got here? So I think that it needs to be prioritized. It needs to be its own project. It needs to be driven so the IT department knows it's a priority. Otherwise, you are going to have some challenges. Yeah. So that's very high level, but that's just from my experience as well. Okay.
Fantastic. Were there any other questions before I read out some of the pre-selected questions? Okay. So we've got a question here for Marsh around the advisory cyber capability. So what's led you to lead into this space, and what do you think is the most exciting aspect about it for you?
Look, it's client driven. I think that we've traditionally, we have conversations with clients a lot about what their challenges are, and we're probably in a unique position to see what happens when you suffer a cyber attack. We see the outages, we see the costs, we see the claims. So it's only natural then that we want to take a true risk management approach to that and sort of step to the other side of the bow tie. I guess if you guys are familiar with that. So and to start to look at causes and look at controls further. Look, I guess it's probably something too that we're not trying to do alone. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel too many times. What we're trying to do is, I guess, to sort of take advantage of the relationships that we've got with our clients and then partner with some of the best in the industry for specific services as well.
I have a question here for Michael. So Michael, what would you suggest in engaging external consultants or certification bodies? I know you and I had a chat about this a little bit earlier. What are the key things that you think make a successful partnership in terms of setting up information systems, something like that?
Yeah, I think it sort of goes back to another point around understanding of your business and cultural fit. I think that if there's a genuine effort to understand how your business operates and what will work and what won't work, and tailoring solutions for that, it's we're not talking about Lego. It's not just like put it together and then everybody it'll work the same. So I think that a consultant that is flexible and listens and gets to understand your business is the right sort of consultant to partner with.
Okay. Now Caesar. We have one question that was raised before today was, why would I pick ISO 27001 over NIST as a framework for information security?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think with NIST, it's more about like proactive controls. I think with the flexibility that you have within ISO to, look at the scope within your environment and then be able to actually look at the different controls and then sort of, I guess, pick the ones that you think are best suited to your environment. I think that's the main difference there. So.
And you've got one more. So outside of the tendering or competitive advantage, obviously they're lovely to have, but outside of the external benefits, what are some of the internal benefits that you've seen from some of the clients you've worked with now or in the past?
Yeah, I think internally it does, so sort of what I mentioned before, me internally benefiting from gaining ISO 27001 certification. Yeah, so a lot of the time you see there's like it's an increase in revenue, obviously you see with, ability to play in different markets and whatnot. But it also does kind of create trust within the trust you have internally and then how you portray yourself externally as well. And it's also quite nice to kind of have all your systems certified as well and also kind of build that system internally so you have something, so it's great kind of for your internal reputation as well.
So that's all the questions that we have today, but if anyone thinks of any other further questions, we'll provide a way for you to reach out and we'll make sure that one of our experts is able to get back in touch with you on. Oh, we have one more question.
I think my question is to you, Brendan.
Sure.
My assumption is that there's no certification for NIST. Is my assumption correct? And there's only certification for ISO, but not for NIST. And as Sita said, that it's proactive controls, yeah, or preventive controls you put. But is there any certification for NIST?
And not to my knowledge, no.
No. Okay, thank you.
Okay, fantastic. So what we'll do is we'll wrap it up there. Thank you everyone for attending and listening in. Any other questions you have, we'll provide all our contact details, and thank you for your time.